we have a panel on the really meaty topic of AI and ML use cases. So these leaders are going to be talking to us about how their strategies are unlocking innovation and delivering results for their organizations.
Welcome everybody. Hopefully everyone's energized after lunch. I'm going to introduce Melissa Stern. She's from Alaska Airlines. We're very excited to have her. Welcome. Thanks. I'm also going to introduce Monica Carvajal, and she's from ADL Digital, and I want to say something special. She's coming all the way from Colombia, so massive shout out. And then Rio Longanger, welcome, and he's the managing director from Slalom. Thanks for joining us, it's great.
Good to see you.
All right. So we're going to kick this off. I think this is an exciting session because we've talked a lot this morning about how we're seeing AI and machine learning everywhere. Saul mentioned that this isn't necessarily something that's new, but we're going to start it off and hear from Rio and all our guests, but we'll start with you on what is the first AI use case that you guys have put into place or that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I like the fact you mentioned it didn't just start, right? And this does go back a little bit. So I mean, looking back, I've been in consulting about 15 years. I remember even when I first started, we were experimenting with machine learning models. A lot of it was contact center. So whether it's chatbots or decisioning engines for agents. And those have gotten better over the years, which has been really fun to track. And I think another thing that started not too long after that was more for the sales function, whether it's, let's say you're a farmer up out in the field giving recommendations for next best action, next best experience, and then like helping them like manage their day, know what to say when they meet with their physician. So I mean, those have improved over time, but I mean and that brings us to the present. You notice when I talked about those first two use cases, one was service, one was sales. So like what was missing was really advertising marketing. But that's been a tale of the last couple of years, right? We've seen initially, I think, more aimed at productivity, whether it's writing creative briefs or translating documents into, from one language into 15, 20, really interesting things. And then I know we're going to talk about this a little later, but in the present, more aimed at advertising, whether it's bid management or optimization of campaign activities, really interesting things in the marketing and advertising function. That's kind of where we are today.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Monica, what about you?
Our first AI implementation was to predict the customer with highest probability to refinancing payrolls. That was for one of the banks that we work. That was 6 years ago. Our strategy actually is based on a framework that is called Applied Data Scientist. It has 5 elements. We have data, technology, business, exploitation, and interactions. We used the same strategy 6 years ago, and we use the same today. And with the same strategy, actually, now we are working in other companies that we have, is to help to predict cancer, for example, in stomach. So the same strategy, different applied, but the same focus, and the focus principle is in how we could create value for the business, actually. That is the same concern before, and still the same concern now.
Yeah, makes sense. How about at Alaska?
So for us, I represent or sit in our e-commerce organization, which means everything we do and touch is guest-facing on our digital properties. And so over the last couple of years, we've really been focusing on personalization. So what can we do to be elevating the guest experience, showing the guests the right offer, the right content at the right time, and also helping us to increase our conversion and revenue. So we've really been focused on building out a set of machine learning models that sit on top of a real-time customer data engine that we have also built that help us really enable that function of serving the right offer to the right guest. So for example, we've done things where we offer a personalized seat upgrade to a guest. So you may see an exit row upgrade, Ria may see a premium class, first class, et cetera, based on specific characteristics about you. We're doing the same thing with flights and ancillaries and destinations. So building a whole host of individual models that sit under what we're calling our framework of a recommendation engine.
That's amazing. And we heard from Amazon earlier how important that is in travel and hospitality. And just, if you're not doing that, you're not going to be successful. So
exactly.
You all are ahead. And sort of a follow-on to that question, what can you tell people in the room about the type of data that you needed for all of these models? And was there any learning there about, customer data or any kind of pitfalls that you might want to avoid? Because I think that that's something that we have heard a lot about. You don't necessarily need all the data, you need the right data. And Rio, if we could start with you, can you walk us through that, what you see?
Yeah, certainly enough data to get the upgrades, right? Yeah. Who doesn't like those? But yeah, I guess looking at the data itself, it's going to depend to a certain extent on the type of use cases and the type of applications you're building. Like let's say, for example, I mentioned decisioning engines before. If you're building a decisioning engine, it's probably going to be pulling data from your systems of insight. That's going to include your C360, CDP, CRM, ERP, kind of the core data systems running the enterprise. By contrast, if let's say you're building something in the more agentic layer, you may be pulling from those, but you'll also be pulling from systems of engagement, from CMS, from apps, from tag managers, things like that. So it's going to depend, and then also to a certain extent it'll depend on, you'll have your large language model itself, but then how are you pulling in additional data in order to fine tune it and improve it over time? So that's something to consider too.
That's great. Monica, how about you?
Well, it depends of the business requirements, actually. So it depends of what is the principal problem that you're looking for. In general, you could use a lot of data. One important thing is how you connect that. Actually, told that before, but in general, we could use, today we have the CRM too. Of course, we have a lot of digital data, and that is a powerful data to have a lot of points to connect different off data and on data. So in general, I could say you could use all data sources that you could have, but you have to consider to connect that and to have some personal identifiers for each problem that you need or you have.
Yeah, and Melissa, was there any particular kind of framework or way that you thought about getting the right data?
Yeah.
And was there any that you said, we don't need that?
Definitely, and I think I'll answer your question in two parts. So first, definitely we've been very deliberate in building out our customer data engine, and that we've been bringing in just the data sets to start with that we need for those specific models. Because in some ways, our challenge has not been a lack of data, but it's been too much data, the right data, and having that data in a way that we're going to be able to actually act on it. The data set is clean, that we're actually able to build those models on top of it. So we've been very deliberate in terms of, okay, let's start with our first use case. What is the data? What are the data sets we need to enable that use case? Whether it's a recommended seat or an abandoned cart, abandoned search, price drop recommendation, or whatever it is. Very deliberate to focus on one use case at a time. But I think the other part that I want to emphasize is your question about what are the different challenges. I think for us, one of the big learnings and challenges has been along the way is not so much, okay, great, we can get that data in our customer data engine, we can generate the hypotheses, build the models, but then it's actually getting those and bringing those to life that becomes challenging. So how do we connect this to our content management system? How do we connect this to our different back-end systems that tell us the actual seat availability so we know we're serving the customer something that is actually going to be true in terms of, hey, if I act on it, they're going to be able to have a seat in that class based on our recommendation? Or how do we connect it to the myriad of other systems that we need to so that we're ensuring that end-to-end delivery of an experience? So I think that's been part of sort of one of our learnings along the way is there's a set of challenges certainly in identifying the data, building the model, but then actually bringing it to life and getting it in front of the customers is another set of steps.
So activating the data and making sure you can do that. Yeah, because a lot of people, there's sort of a lot of thinking around like the models are becoming more commoditized, and it's really about getting the right data and then actually activating it so it's not just sitting there.
Exactly.
That's good. And I also like your point about starting with the use case and working back to figure out the data that you need, and we've heard that a lot today. Going back to you, Rio, what were some of the biggest technical hurdles that you've seen and maybe like some advice that you could give people, even if it's around like, say, like privacy and compliance? That's an area that comes up a lot.
Yeah, no, it does come up a lot. Maybe not as much as it should, right? But no, but it's important. I think the biggest hurdle, I think number one, we talk about getting the data foundation into place and getting that right, having the right tools. That's a big part of it. I mean, I like the presentation earlier with Snowflake. It's a good one because you think about it. You have you're collecting, whether it's from Tag Manager or for the event stream, going to CDP, then into Cloud Data Warehouse, right? Because that's probably where you're going to store your consented data, right? You're capturing it through engagement channels, and you're building your models most likely on top of that. So I think having the right architecture is very important. But I think beyond the tools, and that's a huge piece of it, I think having, in terms of challenges, having the right team in place, starting with use cases, 100%, having the right team in place. It's kind of the double-edged sword of AI, right? On one hand, to get things funded, it helps to have AI in it. Mm-hmm. But once you have AI in it, the bad news is you're gonna have to work with IT, you're gonna have to work with InfoSec, you're gonna have to work with legal and this whole other cast of characters, right? Who are gonna, I think, rightfully insist that this has to adhere to privacy regulations. We don't want to get sued. We don't want people to find out we're building AI solutions on non-consented data. So there's a whole bunch of questions to come up. So I think building your team the right way, having the right people in it, and if that can be a hurdle if you don't do that. And I think people who have not built AI solutions before, that can be a surprise.
Yeah, I agree with that. That was actually going to be a later question, but while we're on that topic, I'd love to get everyone's thoughts around how you thought through really sort of like more your team and your process around this, if you all have comments around that. Because I think for a lot of people, you might have the data, you might have the models, you sort of know what you want to do, but it's something that's not set it and forget it. You have to really keep thinking through it and optimizing it. And so for people here, do you have any advice around team structure or even some of the skills that you would want to have on that team? And I'll start with you, Monica.
Yeah, actually, for me, that is one of the biggest challenges that you have, because this is not a technological race, actually, today. You have a lot of technologies tool and a lot of technology there, but one of the biggest problem for me is you need people with technical solid foundation, but also you need solid business knowledge. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have that, you will have a great geek of group of people that think a lot of about AI, of technology or infrastructure, but they don't know about business. And mm-hmm. if you don't have experts of business, you could lose these people. So that is one of the biggest challenges now. And maybe the other thing is you need literacy in data. It's not about you need a lot of, all the company has to be an expert in AI, but has to know about what is a data product or a data solution. Because without that, some people think that data product is like a magic 8-ball, mm-hmm. and it's not. So it's just a solution that mm-hmm. is not,
right.
Yeah, it's not the truth there.
There's no magic 8-ball. Yeah. Melissa, how about you? Any advice for people?
Well, I would just say 100% second what Monica said, which is it has to be rooted in business value. So mm-hmm. I think, great to have the data scientists, we have back-end engineers, we have front-end engineers, but we have to have somebody. In our case at Alaska, we consider that role a product manager, but it's somebody mm-hmm. that's going to be able to figure out where are these models or this new AI experience, where is that going to add value for the guest, for the business?
Right.
Because otherwise you're just creating models and data for the sake of it, and you're not actually achieving the outcomes that you set out to be. So we always try and really be working backwards from the guests and working mm-hmm. backwards from our outcomes, but I really think having that business knowledge, and it's having sort of a sweet spot and a marriage of business knowledge, but then having kind of the insight or the foresight to then say, and if we do build this ML experience or this AI experience, this is how it can transform the guest experience here. So it is a kind of a unique sweet spot in terms mm-hmm. of what that skill set looks like.
Definitely, and that kind of leads me to my next set of questions, like what are some of the outcomes or KPIs or measurements that you would consider there? Because I think, and maybe if you can also give people a sense of the time frame as well, because I think a lot of these projects, I mean, I think a lot of us have worked with, data science teams, and it's like, it's been 7 months. It's been, where are we at? And so I think everyone can relate to that. And so what are some of the kind of metrics that you look at, Alaska, and I'll ask all of you this, or KPIs, and also a sense of time, like what is the expectation there? And do you feel like you have to help set that in some cases?
Definitely. So I think for us, I think there's probably a couple ways I'd answer that question, which is every sort of new feature or experience we build that's going to go on our digital properties always has to go through an A/B test. That's sort of our gold standard in terms of really being able to understand and evaluate what that guest impact is. So we really look at two, just keep it pretty simple, but two critical kind of KPIs for those, which is, did it drive conversion? Did it drive engagement? So were guests clicking through more? Were they interacting more with it? And did it impact conversion? So those are kind of our two critical KPIs, but I do definitely agree that, and especially as we've been approaching sort of our customer data engine, that these are all foundational building blocks. So that sort of full greater result will take time to really sort of see what that true ROI is. Is that, hopefully we'll see we're getting more increased guests coming back to the site on a more frequent basis. More often we're increasing our loyalty because they're having a better experience, a more personalized experience. So I think you have both a set of sort of short-term metrics and KPIs that you can see from something like an A/B test, and then sort of a longer-term kind of runway where you really start to see kind of the impact of all of these things coming together and what that ultimately means for what we hope is a loyal guest.
Right, that makes sense. And Monica, what are some of your thoughts around that? Because I think also if any of you can comment sort of on the time frame too, because I think that would help people, because again, like something like a click-through rate, we can measure that pretty quickly, but more long-term business impact, do people want to see that in a quarter, or is it like, what's the time frame? So
because our focus is value, we need a measure for value. That is not just idea. So our focus, our measure, actually our KPI is in 6 years we generate approx $100 million in using our different AI models. Also we have other KPIs like the time reduced or cost actually reduced. Or for example, we have other measure that is how much we could reduce the operational workload. Today, using Gen AI, actually in the last year, we reduced that by 50%. So that is the measure that we have.
Yeah.
I think first of all, I would start with success rate going from pilot to actually production. You heard from Sol Rashidi earlier, 10% is the standard. That's really low. I'd say if 10% is where you are, is probably too low. I had a client last year that was 50%, which is great. I think that's rare. So I think that's the first thing you'd look at is what is your percentage. I had clients who were 0 during the first year, doing that kind of, and everyone was throwing stuff at a wall, right? So that's number one. I think the rest will be use case dependent. If it's a hyper personalization, say AI use case is going to be, and we're in outcomes era, right? So it should be click-through rates, conversions, things like that, a customer lifetime value, average order volume, kind of your classic ones. If it's contact center, it's going to be first call resolution, call handling time. It'll be probably the standard metrics you're looking at. I think AI, it's a tool. It's a great tool. It seems like magic, but you're still trying to solve for business challenges. So you probably, I think, use case dependent would look at your standard business metrics.
Do you feel like a lot of the folks that you work with expect those results in less time though? Because I feel like that's a little bit of the assumption with AI or even ML models. It's like, but that should be shrinking the time that I see that impact. Do you feel like you see that?
Yeah, it can go quickly. I've seen things get created quicker. But end of the day, it does, there are things you need to do, right? And there's a reason why low code, no code never really took off, right? It's like, sure, anyone can use Gen AI to create things, but it doesn't mean they're ready for production in an enterprise environment. So you still have to go through your standard checks. I think people can get frustrated with that. Again, you have to pull in legal and InfoSec and check all these boxes, but that's stuff you need to do with anything, right? Gen AI is not exempt from that. AI is not exempt from that, but yeah, I've seen incredible productivity gains, for example, like writing creative briefs, shaving, a 1-day process that was a 5-day process. That's really,
that's impressive.
Translations going from 4 weeks to, couple days, right? Where you just have copywriters editing things at the end. That's a huge savings, right?
Right. And it seems like you can do also even the A/B testing a lot faster too. So then you can really, once you have an informed, model, great, then you can move. So moving to, kind of the next phase, thinking about what are some, AI use cases that you're looking forward to or excited about? And I'll start with you, Rio, for just the future. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about, it seems like they're sort of standard marketing cases, but we're applying AI. Is there anything that you think is novel and exciting that you're working with folks on?
I mean, stuff that's being worked on now, I think is the most exciting, right? So, and you look at like ChatGPT came out the first year was just like this churn, everyone trying things, success rates were low. I think last year was productivity, which is great. Now this year, I think it's more automation, optimization, and more aimed at advertising marketing. So I'll give you a couple examples we're working on right now. Like we're building a Gen AI audience builder, right? Where a non-technical person can go in. What would have taken several screens, they can go in, they can prompt it. It'll create the audience, and you can push it to activation immediately on different DSPs. That's just for one of the big holdcos. It's really cool. It would not have been possible before. Another one, we're looking at bid management. Another one, we're looking at like combining ML, AI, and generative AI to actually for hyper-personalization, where we're actually creating new, because that was always the hard part with personalization, right, is the rubber meets the road, creating content. Okay, in theory, you can create 100 versions of something, but can you? Like, can you, especially if you're in a regulated industry, right, can you push those through your workflows and approvals? So I think that's opening up those possibilities. We're testing out things right now, and I think we're going to see some really incredible results because we know personalization works. Right, but it's always just been hard to actually put it into practice. So I think now it's possible, and the fun begins with testing and trying things out.
Yeah, makes sense. And are you working with folks also on their infrastructure as well? Are there any considerations people have to think about there?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, if you don't have the infrastructure in place, you could have the biggest streams in the world, but maybe you do have to take a step back and work on it, right? Like if you don't have the right consented data to build these models, maybe you have to gather it, and it might be a longer process than maybe people think at first. They get excited about things, but that's okay. I mean, that's why they hire consultants, right?
Yeah, and we heard Jeff this morning talk about a customer that feels that they have to use Tealium now because of having filtered consented data, and it's made it a lot easier. Would you all echo that? Do you feel like you're seeing the same thing?
That's why we're big fans, right? The fact that you can gather the consented data, you can gather it from engagement in different places, you can put it into CDP, you can put it in your cloud data warehouse, not composable architecture. That's becoming more table stakes.
Yeah.
So I think so we're big fans of it. So we're advising clients if they haven't built out something like that to do, because they really need to do it in a thoughtful way, where they can store the data in a place that it'll lend itself well for building these models. Or because I mean, again, the value is not in the large language models itself; is what you build on top of those applications.
Right. Monica, one question that I was thinking a bit about is with personalization, we've all talked about how important it is. How do you balance privacy concerns? How should people think about that?
Well, the first for me is balancing the stakeholder expectations, because some stakeholders, when know that you could apply personalization, they become some crazy and they start to think that if we could make a personalization, so you have to make something like a micro personalization. So if the stakeholder has a 2 years old kid, they want to see everything that you use about that. But that could be works for the stakeholder in the company or our employee. But if you are the customer, you don't like that. I mean, you don't like if some company know everything about you. That is a issue, actually. So, for instance, balancing that. After that, use some practice that is a better thing. For example, use segment groups, interesting for customers, and try to work in groups of customers, not the individual customer. And never forget that we are customers too. So the privacy and good practice in the company is a good responsibility actually for us, not just for some person in somewhere, it's for us too.
Yeah, it makes sense. So with the remaining time that we have, it would be great if you could all end with some advice for, a lot of the folks listening out here who are maybe starting on this journey, because I think that's one thing when you come to these conferences, you're just like, if you can prevent somebody else some pain, I think all of us have gone down the road where it's like, wow, if we had known X, we sure would have done it differently. So, I'll start with you. It's like, what bit of advice could you leave folks with?
I would say start with your end goal in mind, work back, and start small. Get quick wins, get iterative wins, and you'll learn a ton along the way. So I think one thing we did well was pick, again, very specific in our use cases and go one by one to activate those, and I think that's just provided some great learnings that will hopefully help be speeding us up as we go.
I agree. You don't have to boil the ocean.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about you, Monica?
Well, I think that you need 3 main points. First is has a data strategy. You need that. That is not something simple, but you need that. Remember that you need people. This is not just technology. And finally, you need a data culture and data literacy in the company. That is not simple, but you need that to have value on all these new trends. But it's not new, but this trend.
Yeah, makes sense. Rio, take us home.
I guess my advice would be it's not something to be scared of necessarily. I mean, to your point earlier, a lot of this stuff's been out there, right?
It's been out there, yeah.
And some of it might have just been SQL queries, like a string of them, but there have been different decisioning and AI and ML tools out there for a long time. So I don't think it's something to be afraid of, but I like the approach you outlined before, Melissa. Just figure out your use cases, figure out what you want to do. You don't have to boil the ocean. Get the right team together. Understand what type of data foundation do we need, and there's also a buy or build decision to it. Maybe this is something we want to build in house. Your IT department's probably going to say yes. Maybe there's something out there that does a great job of doing this already. I mean, I think most of the AI that's being used today is embedded in existing applications, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like you look at Adobe, like some of their new tools for authoring, just incredible, right? Like you can open it up, you can see like 6 versions of the email. Once you train it, it adheres to your brand standards. You can pick the right one. It's pretty wild, right?
Right.
So it's not hard to use. I mean, it takes setup, obviously, but so I think is this something you're going to build or buy? And if you want to, set your KPIs and set your goals, and with the end in mind, and hopefully in the end, but have a plan for after. Okay, we're going to try this out, but if it works, what's next? Have that plan in place.
Exactly. So starting with the use case, I also will say make sure you have good data, right? Think through that, and the right team of people always makes a big difference, I think. I think people underestimate the people side of it. But,
Absolutely.
well, great. Thank you all. This has been really, I think, very helpful for people.